I'm glad you're here because today's conversation might just change the way you view yourself and how others perceive you. Here's the thing. Truly intelligent individuals share a secret. It's not about having all the answers or memorizing every fact. Their real power lies in knowing when to keep silent. Sometimes what you don't say reveals more about you than any well-crafted statement ever could. For years, I've immersed myself in the study of people, using both ancient Stoic wisdom and countless hours of observing human behavior in real time. And from this, one truth has become clear. The wisest individuals are not those who constantly speak or boast about their knowledge, but those who listen, observe, and know when to hold their tongue. These men don't waste words. They don't rush to fill silence, nor do they utter phrases that undermine their own credibility. They understand that the real strength lies in knowing when to remain quiet. This idea isn't new. Ancient philosophers, particularly the Stoics, believed deeply in the power of restraint. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, wrote extensively about the need to embrace silence and humility. He argued that true wisdom comes from accepting that we don't have all the answers, and that speaking too much often clouds our judgment and actions. Epictetus, another Stoic, warned against pride, suggesting that the wise man listens more than he speaks and values self-mastery over empty words. Today we'll dive into 7 things intelligent men never say, not because they are flawless, but because they have learned often the hard way that these words rarely lead to anything good. Stick around, and let's explore how embracing silence and choosing our words wisely can transform our understanding of self and the world around us. Thing 1. I already know that. There is a phrase we often let slip without much thought. I already know that. It sounds harmless, maybe even confident, as though we are asserting our knowledge, but in reality it reveals something far less flattering: a closed mind, a reluctance to learn, and an inflated sense of self-importance. The problem with this phrase isn't that it's wrong in some cases, but that it signals a belief that we have reached the limits of our growth. And that, my friends, is where intelligence begins to falter. The Stoic philosophers understood this well. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and philosopher, spent much of his life contemplating the nature of knowledge and wisdom. One of his most famous reflections from Meditations is that you cannot learn anything when you think you already know everything. This is the essence of true intelligence, an understanding that no matter how much we think we know, there is always more to learn. When we convince ourselves that we already know something, we are shutting ourselves off from new insights, from different perspectives, and from growth. This self-satisfied attitude isn't intelligence, it's arrogance. The story I want to share comes from a lesson I learned the hard way. Years ago, I was working with a mentor, a man who had experienced life in ways that I could not yet understand. His wisdom was apparent not in what he said, but in the way he said it. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud. It was simply quiet certainty, honed over years of experience. One day, we were going over a process I had done 100 times before, one that I was quite familiar with. I was eager to impress him, to show him that I didn't need his help. As he began explaining something about the process, I interrupted him with a sharp, "Yeah, I know that already." I remember the way he looked at me. It wasn't anger, but a quiet, measured look that carried more weight than any harsh words could. He didn't argue with me. Instead, he simply moved on with the conversation. Later that evening, I realized what I had done. Not only had I interrupted him, but I had also robbed myself of an opportunity to learn something new. Despite my years of experience, my mentor had seen something I had missed: a detail, a nuance, a better way of doing things that wasn't in any manual or video tutorial. His years of living and working had taught him things that only experience could teach. By dismissing his input, I had closed myself off to growth. This experience taught me something fundamental about knowledge. When we say, "I already know that," we aren't just asserting our intelligence. We are asserting that we are done learning, that we have reached the limits of what is available to us. It's a dangerous mindset because it encourages stagnation. And in the Stoic view, stagnation is the enemy of personal growth. The Stoics teach that knowledge is not a static thing, but a flowing, ever-changing river. Epictetus, another prominent Stoic, emphasized that it's not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. In the same way, it is not knowledge that disturbs us, but our judgments about our own knowledge. When we think we already know something, we are making a judgment about the finality of our learning, locking ourselves into a fixed place. But as the river of life flows, so too does knowledge. The waters of understanding change constantly, and even if we step into the same river, the water will never be the same. I've watched people stumble over this illusion of knowing, especially in the workplace. I've seen seasoned professionals, proud of their experience, brush aside advice from younger colleagues simply because they have been there, done that. Yet there is always something new to learn, whether it's a new way of approaching an old problem or a fresh perspective on a well-worn task. The problem isn't that they are wrong, but that they stop being open to the possibility that they might be overlooking something important. They stop listening, stop adapting, stop growing. The Stoic wisdom of Marcus Aurelius holds a critical lesson for us here. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. This means that the obstacles to learning, the moments when we think we know everything, are the very moments where growth can occur. But it requires humility. It requires stepping back and saying, perhaps I don't know everything about this, and allowing the wisdom of others, or even our own further insights, to illuminate the path forward. Take, for example, a seasoned carpenter I once observed working with an apprentice. The apprentice, eager to share his knowledge, began explaining a technique that the carpenter had likely mastered decades ago. Instead of dismissing the apprentice's words, the carpenter listened patiently, nodded, and asked a few thoughtful questions. Later, I asked him why he didn't just tell the apprentice that he already knew the technique. The carpenter simply smiled and said, "Sometimes you learn more by listening to the way someone else sees it. That is wisdom in action." The carpenter didn't need to prove his expertise. He didn't need to assert his knowledge. He was secure in his ability and open to new learning, no matter how familiar the subject might have seemed. And this is what true intelligence looks like: an openness to learning, to hearing, to exploring, and to evolving. He demonstrated that, even in areas where we feel most competent, there is always more to uncover. In Stoic philosophy, we call this the mastery of the self, the ability to set aside pride and ego in favor of clarity, to let go of the belief that we are done learning. Self-mastery is not just about controlling emotions or thoughts. It is also about recognizing when we are closing ourselves off to new growth and opening ourselves to continuous learning. The great philosopher Socrates is famously quoted as saying, "I know that I am intelligent because I know that I know nothing." It's this paradox that forms the foundation of wisdom. True intelligence isn't about knowing everything, but about understanding that there is always more to discover. So, the next time you catch yourself thinking, "I already know that," take a moment to pause and listen anyway. Not because you need to humor someone, but because you might just catch something new. A detail, a shift in perspective, or a nuance that deepens your understanding. Even if you don't, you practice humility, you show respect, and over time, that is what makes you someone others want to listen to. Because in the end, as the Stoics remind us, wisdom is not a trophy to be won. It is a lifelong pursuit, one that requires an open mind, a willingness to learn, and the courage to admit that we don't know everything. Thing 2. That's impossible. There's a phrase that too often slips from our lips, usually in response to a challenge, a new idea, or an obstacle that seems insurmountable. That's impossible. At first glance, it might sound like a simple, rational response to a difficult situation. After all, we all face challenges that appear to have no solution. But when we dive deeper, this phrase reveals more about our own limitations and fears than it does about the reality of the situation itself. The Stoics, who understood the nature of human suffering and growth, had a distinct perspective on the power of our thoughts and perceptions. They believed that it's not the events themselves that shape our lives, but how we interpret them. Seneca, one of the great Stoic philosophers, wrote, We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. This statement highlights a core truth. The idea that something is impossible often stems not from an objective assessment of the situation, but from our own fears, doubts, and preconceptions. When we say that's impossible, what we are really doing is projecting our own limitations onto the situation. We are declaring defeat before the fight has even begun. This is a form of self-imposed paralysis, a way of convincing ourselves that we are powerless, that the challenge is too great to overcome. This phrase may be a defense mechanism, a way to avoid the discomfort of facing uncertainty or fear of failure. But in doing so, we close ourselves off from the very opportunities that might lead to growth. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus had a powerful insight into the nature of obstacles. He said, "It's not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them." In other words, it's not the challenges we face that determine our success, but how we perceive them. When we call something impossible, we are letting our judgment dictate the outcome before we've even tried. We are choosing to surrender to fear, to let the imagined size of the challenge paralyze us, rather than looking for a way forward. I remember working alongside a leader named Robert several years ago. Robert was a sharp and experienced professional, the kind of leader who could seemingly carry the weight of an entire company without breaking a sweat. He had seen it all, done it all, and his calm demeanor and sharp mind earned him the respect of everyone around him. However, there was one phrase he used often, almost reflexively, whenever a new idea was proposed or a challenge arose. "That's impossible." At first, it seemed like a reasonable response. After all, there were plenty of situations where failure was likely, where resources were limited and the odds seemed stacked. But over time, I began to see a pattern. Every time Robert said, "That's impossible," it wasn't the situation he was describing. It was his own limits that he was imposing. He wasn't analyzing the problem objectively. He was projecting his own fears and doubts onto it. I watched as he dismissed new ideas, proposals, and solutions, not because they were unworkable, but because they seemed unfamiliar or risky. Instead of embracing the uncertainty of a challenge, he shut it down with a single phrase. This kind of thinking isn't just about dismissing opportunities. It's about surrendering our ability to take control of the situation. Robert's frequent use of "that's impossible" wasn't born from a deep analysis of the situation. It was born from his own fear of failure, his fear of the unknown, and his fear of being wrong. The Stoics believed that fear, while an inherent part of human nature, is often irrational and based on our own mental projections. Seneca, again, put it well. "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality." Take, for example, a project I was part of several years ago. The situation seemed impossible. The budget was tight, the timeline was ridiculously short, and the team was inexperienced. Every logical bone in my body told me that it couldn't be done. But instead of saying "that's impossible," I decided to approach it differently. I asked myself, what can I control today? What's the next small step I can take? This shift in mindset made all the difference. Instead of being paralyzed by the enormity of the challenge, we focused on breaking it down into manageable tasks. We didn't look at the whole mountain. We focused on the next step, then the next. Over time, the project became one of the most successful I had ever worked on, not because we performed miracles, but because we refused to be immobilized by fear and uncertainty. We took action no matter how small. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." This is the essence of Stoic courage. It's not about eliminating obstacles or avoiding difficulty, but about taking control of how we respond to them. When we say "that's impossible," we give up that control. We are handing over our power to external circumstances, resigning ourselves to defeat before we've even made an attempt. But when we choose to act, even when the odds seem stacked against us, we reclaim our power. We choose persistence over surrender. The Stoics were not naive optimists. They didn't believe that every challenge could be overcome, nor did they advocate for reckless optimism. Instead, they believed in disciplined persistence, the ability to face difficult situations with calm, deliberate action. This is the kind of courage that doesn't see an obstacle as a roadblock, but as a challenge to step forward. It's not about denying the reality of a situation. It's about choosing to take action despite it. This mindset can be transformative in both personal and professional life. Think about how often we limit ourselves by declaring something impossible. We might tell ourselves, "I'm not good enough," or "I don't have the skills," or "It's too late for me to change." But the Stoics remind us that the obstacle isn't the problem. It's our perception of the obstacle that defeats us. By shifting our mindset, by choosing to act even when things seem impossible, we open doors that others never even see. The key here is not blind optimism or denying the challenges in front of us. It's about embracing the discomfort and uncertainty, choosing to take small manageable steps and focusing on what we can control. Strength is not built by winning every battle, but by showing up again and again, especially when the odds seem insurmountable. So the next time you're faced with a challenge, pause before you say, "That's impossible." Ask yourself, "What can I do right now? What's the next step I can take?" It may not lead to immediate success, but it will always lead to growth. The path forward is not determined by how big the obstacle is, but by how we choose to perceive it and how we choose to respond. This is Stoic courage, not reckless optimism, but disciplined persistence in the face of adversity. When we stop seeing obstacles as insurmountable walls and start viewing them as challenges to step forward into, we begin to unlock the true power of action, and that is the wisdom that can transform our lives. Thing 3. That's not my fault. One of the most damaging phrases that can slip from a man's lips is, "That's not my fault." It's a phrase that can easily be justified in the heat of the moment, especially when things go wrong. Whether it's a mistake at work, a failure in a relationship, or some other problem that arises, it feels natural to want to protect ourselves from blame. But the Stoics would urge us to see this impulse for what it is, a refusal to take responsibility. And by doing so, we relinquish our power to influence the outcome and grow from the experience. When we say, "That's not my fault," we are passing the buck. We're shifting the responsibility onto others, and by doing so, we forfeit the opportunity to learn from the situation and improve. Instead of taking ownership, we place the control and the power to change in someone else's hands. In Stoic philosophy, this is a dangerous mindset. It goes against the Stoic principle of focusing only on what is within our control and accepting that everything else is outside our influence. The Stoics, particularly Epictetus, emphasize the importance of focusing on what we can control and letting go of everything else. Epictetus said, "It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." In the context of, "That's not my fault," this teaches us that we cannot control the actions of others, but we can control how we respond. By refusing to take responsibility, we not only abdicate control over our own actions, but also block the possibility of meaningful change. We remain passive in a situation that demands our active engagement. Let me share a story from my own experience that illustrates the point. A few years ago, I worked with a colleague named Michael, who had a reputation for being highly skilled at his job. However, one day he lost a major client, a blow that was felt deeply by the entire team. As the situation unfolded, Michael was quick to explain why it wasn't his fault. The client was difficult, the market was shifting, and his team had missed deadlines. While some of these factors were indeed true, the real issue was that Michael was so focused on defending himself that he missed an important opportunity to reflect and learn from the experience. Instead of asking himself, "What could I have done differently?" or "How can I improve next time?" Michael spent all his energy justifying his actions and placing blame on external factors. By refusing to claim responsibility for his part in the failure, he missed the chance to grow, to analyze the situation more deeply, and to change his approach for the future. The Stoics, in contrast, teach us that responsibility is not about finding someone to blame. It's about finding a way forward. Seneca, one of the greatest Stoic thinkers, wrote extensively about the power of responsibility. In his letters, He often emphasized the importance of taking ownership, not because we are to blame, but because only through ownership can we regain control. By taking responsibility, we regain agency over the situation. We stop waiting for someone else to make things right, and instead look inward, asking, "What can I do differently next time?" One of the core tenets of Stoicism is that we cannot control external events, but we can control our reactions to them. When we say, "That's not my fault," we are neglecting this Stoic wisdom. We are choosing to react to external events instead of controlling our own responses. Blame in this sense is an illusion. It keeps us stuck in a cycle of defensiveness and prevents us from moving forward. Take, for instance, a relationship gone wrong. It's easy to point fingers and say it's their fault, especially when we feel hurt or betrayed. But what the Stoics teach us is that no matter how unfair or unjust the situation may seem, we still have the power to choose our response. Epictetus, in his teachings, suggested that it is not the events themselves that cause our suffering, but the judgments we make about them. In other words, by placing blame on others, we are choosing to remain passive and reactive. We give others control over our emotions and well-being. I once knew someone who, whenever conflict arose, would immediately retreat into defensiveness, saying, "That's not my fault." It became a barrier to resolving the issue at hand. By refusing to take any responsibility, he isolated himself from the possibility of making things right or learning from the situation. Each time he said it, he placed a greater distance between himself and those around him. And ironically, he became the very person who was hardest to work with or be around. He could not see that by claiming ownership, even for a small part of the issue, he could have opened the door to repair and reconciliation. In the Stoic view, focusing on external factors like blame or fault only clouds our ability to act with clarity and intention. It diverts our energy away from constructive solutions and towards a self-serving narrative. Rather than dwelling on fault, Stoicism encourages us to ask, "What can I control?" This shift in focus moves us from a passive state of victimhood to an active state of empowerment. We may not be able to undo the damage, but we can control our actions going forward. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." This quote speaks to the Stoic commitment to action over idle reflection. It doesn't matter whose fault something is. What matters is what we do next. We can't change the past, but we can change how we handle the future. Taking responsibility is not about accepting blame, but about regaining control over our actions and responses. It is through this control that we gain true power. Imagine if Michael, instead of focusing on the external reasons for the lost client, had asked himself, "What part did I play in this? What could I have done differently?" This simple shift in perspective could have empowered him to make meaningful changes. Instead of staying stuck in a cycle of blame and defensiveness, he could have moved forward with a clear sense of purpose and growth. Stoicism teaches us that our responses to life's challenges shape who we are. If we constantly blame others, we give them power over us. But if we take responsibility, we reclaim control and position ourselves for growth. The Stoic path isn't one of perfection, but of continuous self-examination and improvement. It's about looking inward and asking how we can do better, not about pointing outward and blaming others. So the next time you find yourself saying, "That's not my fault," pause for a moment. Ask yourself, what can I learn from this? What can I control moving forward? By accepting even a small piece of responsibility, you can take back the power to influence the outcome. It's a powerful act of self-mastery, and it's the key to turning failure into opportunity. In the end, the Stoic wisdom is clear. Ownership, not blame, is where the power lies. The man who takes responsibility is the man who can learn, adapt, and ultimately lead a life of greater meaning and effectiveness. Thing 4. I don't need any help. There is a phrase that many men, myself included, have uttered at some point in our lives. I don't need any help. It may sound noble, perhaps even strong at first glance. After all, self-reliance is often celebrated in our society. The myth of the self-made man teaches us that true strength comes from independence, carrying our burdens alone, not relying on others, and showing the world that we can handle it all by ourselves. But beneath this seemingly virtuous declaration lies a far more insidious truth. The refusal to ask for help is often a mask for pride, and it can isolate us from the support and growth we so desperately need. The Stoics, who focused on wisdom, self-control, and virtue, believed that human beings are not meant to go through life alone. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most well-known Stoic philosophers, regularly reflected on the importance of interconnectedness. Despite his immense power, as the Roman emperor, he acknowledged in his meditations the debts he owed to his teachers, his friends, and his mentors. He didn't shy away from seeking counsel. In fact, he saw wisdom as something that was cultivated through relationships, not in isolation. This is the lesson that intelligent men learn over time. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness, but an act of strength and humility. To refuse help is to deny the natural interdependence that exists between human beings. We are not solitary creatures isolated from one another. We are social beings bound together by shared experiences, challenges, and goals. In Stoic philosophy, this interconnectedness is not only recognized, but embraced. Epictetus, another central figure in Stoicism, taught that we are part of a larger whole, and that our strength lies not in fighting the world alone, but in cooperating with others. He wrote, "No man is an island," reminding us that we are made for cooperation, mutual aid, and the exchange of wisdom. Let me give you an example from my own life. For many years, I believed that asking for help was a sign of failure. I thought that if I couldn't handle a situation on my own, it meant I wasn't strong enough or capable enough. This belief came from a desire to prove myself, both to others and to myself. I didn't want to be seen as dependent or weak, so I kept my struggles to myself. Over time, this mindset became a trap. I carried burdens alone, thinking that self-reliance was the path to strength. But in reality, it was draining me. It kept me from reaching out to those who could offer guidance, support, or even a different perspective. The turning point came when I finally admitted to someone I trusted that I couldn't do it alone. It wasn't a moment of surrender, but a moment of liberation. I realized that true strength wasn't in carrying the weight by myself, but in recognizing when I needed help and being humble enough to ask for it. When I finally opened up, the support I received was not only practical but emotional. I gained a clarity I hadn't known I was missing. I found that I could handle challenges far better when I had the help and perspective of others. The Stoics would argue that this reliance on others is not a weakness but a reflection of wisdom. Marcus Aurelius often wrote about the importance of seeking counsel from those around him. As emperor, he had access to countless advisors, but he valued their insights, even when their opinions conflicted with his own. His humility in this regard is instructive. He understood that no matter how powerful or knowledgeable he was, he could never have all the answers. His wisdom came from being open to the perspectives of others, from acknowledging that he was part of a larger network of individuals who all contributed to his growth. Abraham Lincoln, often regarded as one of the greatest leaders in American history, exemplified this idea. Despite the immense pressure he faced during the Civil War, Lincoln leaned on others for support. He surrounded himself with a diverse group of advisors, known as his team of rivals. They often disagreed, sometimes fiercely, but Lincoln valued their different perspectives. He didn't isolate himself with his own ideas or beliefs. He sought out those who challenged him, who pushed him to think differently. This is a powerful lesson in leadership and wisdom. Asking for help doesn't diminish your power. It enhances it. But this refusal to ask for help isn't always easy to recognize. Often it masquerades as pride or a desire for independence. It's a quiet form of arrogance that tells us that we should be able to handle everything on our own. It's tempting to believe that asking for help is a sign of failure, that it shows weakness or lack of competence. But the Stoics would argue that this belief is rooted in misunderstanding. True strength comes from humility, the ability to admit that we don't have all the answers and to seek guidance when needed. Seneca, in his letters, wrote about the importance of self-reliance, but he also emphasized that wisdom comes from recognizing when we are not enough on our own. He suggested that we should embrace our interconnectedness and lean on others when necessary. In one of his writings, he reminds us that a man is made by his belief. As he believes, so he is. If we believe that we are weak for asking for help, we become weak. But if we believe that help is a natural and necessary part of life, then we can grow stronger by seeking it. The refusal to ask for help can also be a way of avoiding vulnerability. Vulnerability requires courage. The courage to admit that we don't have all the answers, that we need others, and that we are not invincible. The Stoics would argue that this vulnerability is not something to be feared, but something to be embraced. It is through vulnerability that we connect with others, learn, and grow. To reject help is to close ourselves off from these opportunities for connection and growth. Think about the role of a mentor in our lives. A mentor is someone who can offer guidance, perspective, and wisdom from their own experiences. But mentors can only help if we are willing to ask for their help and listen to their advice. If we refuse help, we cut ourselves off from the valuable lessons they can offer. This is a critical part of the Stoic path, recognizing that we are not alone in our journey and that others can help us become better versions of ourselves. The Stoics didn't believe that we should rely on others for everything, but they understood the importance of cooperation and shared wisdom. They recognized that we are not islands, but part of a vast network of relationships, and that strength comes from learning to work together. Asking for help, then, is not a weakness. It is a recognition of our interdependence and a way to grow, stronger through collaboration. So the next time you catch yourself saying, "I don't need any help," stop and reconsider. Ask yourself if it's pride or fear holding you back. Recognize that true strength lies in knowing when to reach out for assistance, guidance, and support. The Stoics teach us that we are stronger when we lean on others, not weaker. By asking for help, we are not admitting defeat. We are choosing to be part of something greater than ourselves. And in that choice lies true wisdom. Thing 5. I'm too old for that. There is a dangerous phrase that often slips out of our mouths as we grow older. I'm too old for that. Whether it's taking on a new project, learning a new skill, or stepping outside of our comfort zone, age can sometimes become an excuse to limit ourselves. It may feel like a simple, understandable admission, a sign of wisdom and experience. But in reality, this phrase is more than just a statement about age. It is an acceptance of the false idea that we are done growing, that our potential has somehow expired. This mindset not only undermines the possibilities of the present, but also denies the Stoic truth that growth is a lifelong pursuit, no matter how old we are. The Stoics understood the human tendency to settle into comfort as we age, and they warned against it. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor of Rome, reflected deeply on the nature of age and time in his meditations. He was well aware of the passage of years and the inevitable approach of death, but rather than succumbing to resignation or despair, he urged himself to continue living fully and virtuously. Marcus wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." This stark reminder of mortality wasn't meant to breed fear. It was meant to inspire action. Life, he understood, is always in motion. Age does not diminish our duty to live fully. Yet how often do we hear someone or ourselves say, "I'm too old for that"? In this statement lies a belief that age is a barrier to growth and exploration, that the best chapters of life are behind us. But the Stoic wisdom encourages us to reject this belief. To say, "I'm too old for that," is to deny the essence of life itself, which is rooted in constant change and improvement. Take, for example, the life of the philosopher Diogenes. Diogenes, known for his ascetic lifestyle and his unconventional ways of thinking, defied the expectations of age and social norms throughout his life. He continued to challenge the status quo, teach and live according to his principles well into his later years. Despite his advancing age, Diogenes didn't stop questioning, didn't stop learning, and didn't stop living with purpose. His life stands as a testament to the idea that age doesn't limit our ability to grow, to learn, or to make an impact. The Stoics also understood that wisdom grows with experience, not because we age, but because we continue to seek knowledge and clarity over time. Seneca, in his Letters from a Stoic, wrote about how age brings with it the opportunity for greater understanding, not a reason for retreat. He emphasized that it's not the passing years that should slow us down, but our willingness to remain curious and engaged with the world. As long as you live, Seneca wrote, keep learning how to live. For the Stoics, this was not a suggestion, it was a way of life. Wisdom isn't a gift reserved for the young, nor is it something that is automatically conferred with age. It's something we must continuously pursue, no matter our stage of life. In his later years, Seneca wrote about how his own mind remained eager to learn despite his advancing age. He did not allow the number of his years to convince him that there was nothing more to discover or teach. Instead, he embraced each day as an opportunity for further growth. His writings make it clear that, for him, life didn't lose its meaning as he aged. Rather, his understanding of it deepened. This perspective, too, can be found in the life of the philosopher Epicurus, who, in his later years, encouraged his followers to keep asking questions, keep challenging assumptions, and keep striving to live virtuously. The pursuit of wisdom, for the Stoics, was a lifelong endeavor. This is not to say that physical limitations do not come with age, they certainly do. But the Stoics made a distinction between physical decay and the capacity of the mind. Marcus Aurelius in particular was well aware of his declining health. Yet, even as his body deteriorated, his commitment to self-discipline, to reflecting on his actions, and to living with virtue never waned. He continued to write meditations, offering a window into the ongoing development of his mind. His physical body may have aged, but his pursuit of virtue and wisdom did not. The mindset of "I'm too old for that" often acts as a self-imposed barrier to pursuing new opportunities or overcoming challenges. It creates an invisible limit, one that doesn't come from external forces, but from within. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that we have missed our chance to do something, that it's too late to learn or to change. This belief feeds into the idea that age is a disqualifier, that the clock has run out, and there is nothing left to be achieved. But that belief is not grounded in the reality of our potential. The Stoics remind us that there is no expiration date on growth. Take, for instance, the inspiring story of Harry Bernstein, who wrote his first book at the age of 93. His memoir, The Invisible Wall, was a critical success, earning international acclaim despite his late start in writing. Harry didn't let his age limit his potential. He didn't say, "I'm too old for that." Instead, he chose to pursue his passion and live fully, regardless of the number of years behind him. After that first book, he went on to write 3 more. His example shows that age is not a barrier to achievement. It's merely a number. The true barrier lies in our mindset. The Stoic philosophers believed in the power of the present moment, the ability to act with purpose, clarity, and virtue, regardless of our age. For them, the path to fulfillment was not determined by the years behind us, but by the actions we take today. As Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." This call to action applies to all people at all stages of life. It's not about the years that have passed, but about what we choose to do now. The key to overcoming the belief that we are too old is to shift our perspective. We need to recognize that the act of learning, the act of growing, is not confined to youth. Age doesn't disqualify us from living boldly. It actually equips us with something that youth does not always have: experience. With age comes the opportunity to reflect, to learn from the mistakes of the past, and to apply that knowledge with wisdom and clarity. The Stoics believed that growth doesn't stop with age, it ripens. The next time you catch yourself saying, "I'm too old for that," pause and reconsider. Ask yourself if the thought is truly about your age, or if it's about your willingness to push beyond self-imposed limits. Embrace the wisdom that comes with age, but also embrace the possibility that, no matter how many years have passed, there is still more to do, more to learn, and more to contribute. The Stoic path is a path of constant growth, a path that continues until the very last moment of life. And as long as we have breath, we still have the opportunity to act, to learn, and to live fully. Let's not limit ourselves by the passage of time. Instead, let us embrace the Stoic ideal, to live virtuously, with purpose, and with a deep, unyielding curiosity no matter how old we are. Thing 6. I'll do it later. We all know the phrase, "I'll do it later." It seems harmless enough, doesn't it? After all, we all have things on our plates, and sometimes it feels like we just need to take a step back, gather our thoughts, and tackle things when the time is right. But there's a deeper problem with this phrase, one that erodes the very foundation of a life well lived. The Stoics, particularly Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, were keenly aware of the human tendency to procrastinate, to delay things until the perfect moment arrives, or worse, until we've allowed time to slip away. They understood that this is not just an unfortunate habit, it is a dangerous attitude that keeps us from living fully and with purpose. To say, "I'll do it later," is to acknowledge that something important needs to be done, but to also choose to put it off, often indefinitely. This delay doesn't give us more time, it steals the time we could have used to act and grow. Marcus Aurelius in his meditations frequently reminded himself of his own mortality. He wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." This is a clear reflection of the Stoic mindset. Life is finite, and death is always approaching. To delay important tasks, decisions, or even difficult conversations is to waste the precious time we have. The Stoics didn't engage in morbid reflection on death for the sake of fear, but rather to encourage an urgency in life, to act today, to live fully, and to make meaningful progress without hesitation. When we say, "I'll do it later," we are pretending that we have all the time in the world, but in truth none of us knows when that time will run out. Seneca, in his essay on the shortness of life, wrote extensively about how we squander time by procrastinating. He believed that many people waste their lives by allowing distractions, excuses, and the false belief that there is always tomorrow to get in the way of what truly matters. Seneca's words are as relevant today as they were when he wrote them. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. By constantly putting things off, we fool ourselves into thinking that we have time to spare, when in fact, every moment that slips away is a moment we will never get back. This is one of the most pernicious consequences of saying, "I'll do it later." We trick ourselves into thinking we are giving ourselves more time, but in reality, we are stealing time from our future selves. The key to overcoming this mindset is recognizing that time is the most precious resource we have. It is the one thing we cannot get back. Yet how often do we put off the things that matter most? Whether it's starting a new project, having an important conversation, or making a change in our lives, because we think we have more time. The Stoics would remind us that the real wisdom lies in acting with urgency, not recklessly, but with intention. Every decision we make is an opportunity to take ownership of our time, to use it wisely, and to shape the life we want to live. One of the most striking things about the Stoic approach to time is how much emphasis they placed on the present moment. The present is the only moment over which we have control. To put things off until later is to give away control of the present, and to deny ourselves the chance to shape our lives with the actions we take today. Epictetus, one of the great Stoic philosophers, taught that we should focus on what is within our control. By delaying action, we are surrendering control to something outside of us, whether it be the passage of time or our own fear of discomfort. It's important to understand that the Stoics didn't believe in living recklessly or impulsively. The idea is not to act without consideration, but to act with deliberate intent, to move toward the things that matter, and to avoid falling into the trap of endless postponement. Procrastination doesn't stem from careful deliberation. It stems from fear, self-doubt, or the illusion that there will always be more time. But as Seneca noted, the greatest obstacle to living is expectancy, which hangs upon tomorrow and loses today. I've experienced the consequences of this mindset personally. There was a time when I put off difficult conversations, convinced that I could always have them later. I told myself that the timing wasn't right, or that I'd be in a better frame of mind later on. But in the end, those conversations didn't happen. The opportunity to resolve conflict, to clear the air, to make things right, it all slipped away because I kept putting it off. And when the moment was lost, so was the chance for growth, for connection, and for peace of mind. The regret I felt wasn't just about the conversation itself. It was about the time I had wasted believing that I could always put it off until later. The Stoics would say that this is exactly the problem with procrastination. It is an illusion of control. We think that by postponing the inevitable, we gain more time, but in reality, we are losing time and denying ourselves the possibility of living a meaningful life. Marcus Aurelius, despite his responsibilities as emperor, never lost sight of the need to act in the present moment. He reminded himself time and again to be active, to stay engaged, and to make each moment count. Now is the time, he wrote. The present moment is all we ever have. We can apply this same mindset to every area of our lives. When we catch ourselves thinking, I'll do it later, we need to pause and ask, why not now? There is no perfect moment, no ideal set of circumstances that will make the task easier or the conversation less uncomfortable. The only time we truly control is the present, and it's in the present that we have the power to take action, to make decisions, and to move forward. The Stoics understood that there would always be obstacles, difficulties, and distractions in life. They didn't suggest that we should ignore these challenges, but they did teach us that we must act despite them. Waiting for the perfect moment or ideal conditions is a recipe for inaction. To live a Stoic life is to act with purpose, to focus on what we can control, and to recognize that time is the one resource we cannot afford to waste. So, the next time you find yourself saying, I'll do it later, stop and reconsider. Ask yourself, what will I gain by acting now? How will I feel tomorrow if I delay it? What will I miss out on by putting it off? Procrastination only gives us the illusion of more time, but in reality, it takes away our most precious resource. The Stoic path is one of acting with urgency, making the most of the present and refusing to let later rob us of the life we could be living today. In the end, wisdom is not about waiting for the perfect time. It's about taking action in the moment we have, knowing that the time for change is always now. Thing 7. That's just how I am. One of the most limiting beliefs we can adopt is summed up in the phrase, that's just how I am. It's a statement that sounds definitive, almost comforting in its simplicity, but in reality, it can trap us into an unchanging, unreflective life. It suggests that who we are in terms of temperament, habits, and reactions is fixed, that we are prisoners of our own nature. The Stoics, however, would vehemently challenge this belief. They understood that growth, transformation, and self-mastery are not just possible, but essential to living a virtuous and meaningful life. To say, that's just how I am, is to resign ourselves to our weaknesses, to our flaws, and to our old habits. But the Stoics argued that we are not defined by our nature or past actions. We are defined by the choices we make in the present. The Stoic philosophy teaches us that we are not prisoners of our impulses, our desires, or our past behaviors. Epictetus, one of the central Stoic philosophers, famously said, "It's not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them." This principle applies not only to external events, but to our internal beliefs and self-perceptions. When we say, "That's just how I am," we are making a judgment about our nature, an assumption that we cannot change or improve. But Epictetus and other Stoics would argue that this assumption is false. We are not at the mercy of our old habits or fixed traits. We have the power to shape who we become, moment by moment, through deliberate actions and decisions. This idea of self-mastery and transformation is central to Stoic thought. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, repeatedly reminded himself that he had the power to change his thoughts, his actions, and his responses. Despite being the most powerful man in the Roman Empire, Marcus didn't see himself as exempt from the need for continuous self-improvement. He understood that personal growth is a lifelong endeavor, and that even the most virtuous among us must continually strive for betterment. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way, he wrote. For Marcus, the obstacles in our nature, the habits, the weaknesses, the tendencies we believe are fixed, are not walls that define us, but opportunities to grow, to overcome, and to change. The phrase, "that's just how I am," often stems from a place of self-excuse. It's a way of rationalizing behavior that we know is less than ideal, yet we convince ourselves that it's out of our control. Perhaps it's an outburst of anger we justify by saying, "I've always been this way," or a tendency to avoid confrontation with, "I'm just not that kind of person." These kinds of excuses keep us stuck in patterns of behavior that no longer serve us. The Stoics would argue that we are not defined by our temperaments or our old habits, but by our ability to choose our actions and responses. We are not victims of who we once were. We are architects of who we choose to become. In his discourses, Epictetus emphasized that no one is born with an unchangeable character. Our nature, our tendencies, and our behaviors are shaped over time by our choices, by the way we respond to life's challenges, and by the values we choose to uphold. He wrote, "Don't give in to the desire to remain in your old habits. The things that stand in the way of progress are not fixed. They are obstacles to be overcome." The Stoic approach is not one of passivity, but of active engagement with the self. It's about recognizing our flaws, acknowledging the areas in which we need to grow, and then taking deliberate steps toward transformation. The idea of, "that's just how I am," also stems from a fixed mindset, a belief that our traits are unchangeable. This mindset is often in opposition to the growth mindset, which is grounded in the belief that we can always learn, improve, and adapt. Carol Dweck, a modern psychologist, coined the term fixed mindset to describe the belief that our abilities and traits are set in stone. In contrast, a growth mindset is based on the idea that we can develop our intelligence, our emotional intelligence, and our character through effort and perseverance. The Stoics, long before Dweck's work, held a growth mindset in the highest regard. They believed that virtue, wisdom, and self-control could be cultivated over a lifetime. To say, "that's just how I am," is to surrender to a fixed mindset, to stop trying to evolve, to stop pushing the boundaries of our potential. It's an abdication of responsibility, a refusal to take charge of our personal development. But the Stoics understood that growth requires discomfort. It requires us to step outside of our familiar patterns and face the aspects of ourselves that we would rather leave unexamined. Marcus Aurelius encouraged himself to use even the most challenging moments as opportunities for growth. He wrote, "What is not good for the beehive is not good for the bee." In other words, when we fail to grow or improve, we harm not only ourselves but also the community around us. Our failure to develop and evolve has consequences, not just for us but for those we interact with, work with, and influence. The Stoics also believed that self-mastery is the highest form of wisdom. For them, wisdom was not about knowing everything but about having the discipline to recognize our flaws, to accept our imperfections, and to work towards becoming the best version of ourselves. It's about seeing the obstacles in our nature as opportunities to practice virtue and improve our character. This takes humility. It takes the humility to admit that we are not perfect and that there are always areas in which we can improve. When we say, "that's just how I am," we stop trying to grow. We stop seeing ourselves as works in progress. We choose to remain static when, in fact, we should always be striving toward progress. I've found that the moments in which I've grown the most are those in which I've confronted my own weaknesses head-on, rather than making excuses for them. There were times when I felt justified in my impatience, in my tendency to withdraw from difficult conversations, or in my reluctance to take risks. But each of these "that's just how I am" moments held me back from becoming the person I wanted to be. The change didn't happen until I refused to accept my limitations and began to take intentional actions toward transformation. The Stoics urge us to continually examine ourselves, to be vigilant in the pursuit of virtue, and to reject the notion that we are fixed in our ways. It's not enough to say that's just how I am. We must always ask, who do I want to become? And then, we must take active steps toward that version of ourselves. So the next time you catch yourself saying, that's just how I am, take a moment to reflect. Ask yourself if that statement is really a surrender to your flaws or if it's an invitation to change. The Stoic way is not to accept things as they are, but to continually seek improvement, to embrace discomfort, and to become the best version of ourselves no matter how long the journey takes. We are not prisoners of our past. We are the architects of our future. The Stoic path is one of continual self-examination, growth, and transformation until the very last breath. If you found yourself saying any of these 7 things, whether it's, I already know that, that's impossible, that's not my fault, I don't need any help, I'm too old for that, I'll do it later, or that's just how I am, rest assured you're not alone. I've been there too, more times than I care to admit. But here's the good news. Each of these phrases is a chance to recognize where we might be limiting ourselves and to choose a different path forward. The Stoic philosophy teaches us that we are not defined by our past mistakes, our current limitations, or our unexamined beliefs. We are defined by the choices we make every day, the actions we take, and our willingness to grow. What the Stoics understood, and what we must embrace, is that wisdom isn't about never making mistakes. It's about recognizing those mistakes and choosing to do better. Each time we catch ourselves thinking or speaking in limiting ways, we have an opportunity to step outside those patterns and challenge ourselves to grow. This process isn't always easy, and it often involves discomfort, but that's the essence of personal growth. The wisdom the Stoics teach isn't about perfection. It's about being constantly curious, constantly humble, and always willing to improve. As you move forward, I encourage you to reflect on these phrases when they arise in your life. Instead of letting them limit your potential, see them as opportunities to become better, to take action, to learn, and to grow. Practice humility in the face of knowledge you think you already have. Embrace challenges, even when they seem impossible. Take responsibility for your actions and stop avoiding help. Recognize that age is never a barrier to learning or creating something new. Start acting now, instead of waiting for the perfect moment. And finally, refuse to be defined by past habits or personality traits that no longer serve you. The journey of self-mastery is ongoing. It's not about reaching a final destination, but about making intentional choices each day to become a better version of yourself. As we move through life, these Stoic principles can help us navigate the inevitable challenges and obstacles. They provide us with the clarity and resilience needed to live more meaningfully. So, which phrase hit home for you today? Whatever it is, this is your invitation to take the next step. Because wisdom isn't about being perfect, it's about staying curious, staying humble, and always moving forward.